I've been seeing a lot of videos on YouTube lately with people who are starting to collect skulls, especially with people like myself that are more open about death and death acceptance, who want to hold on to the skull of a deceased pet that they had, especially if it was a very special childhood pet. The reason why I'm doing this video is that a lot of the people on YouTube that are talking about the skulls, they show the skull, and they're very upset that the skull is broken. And I'm looking at this piece, and they're saying, oh, there's nothing that I can do, it's broken, it's ruined, I can't do anything with it, it's just so brittle, and its teeth are falling out, and they're saying stuff that way. And I'm not doing this, saying this to be mean in any way, but your skull is not broken. Believe me, I've dealt with skulls that are actually fractured and trying to put them together. Most people, when they think of skulls, they think of a nice specimen like this raccoon here, where the jaw is on the skull and it opens up, and that's what they think that a skull looks like, but skull doesn't look like this at all. Well, it looks like this, but this is the mechanics of it. Your mandible does separate, and it comes off. A lot of people are saying a skull is broken when it's like this. That's not the case at all. The only thing that holds the lower jaw onto the skull is along this little part here. There are connective tissues that hold it into its slot right here. So once the organic flesh matter has decayed, that is no longer there. So your skull is not going to be put together like this. Another thing is people tend to panic when the jaw itself breaks in two. That's supposed to be like that. They actually come together. They're in two parts, and these parts get glued together like that. It's nothing to panic about when you have a skull which is in three parts. When it is time to say that your skull is broken is when you actually have an actual broken skull, which is when the back of the cranium has broken off or it's completely shattered. And again, this is not a broken skull, this is just a separated skull, because the skull has natural plates. You can see that ridge line here. That was meant to be broken off. You can see this in other skull examples, and I might do a close-up to show you if this doesn't focus right. But along this ridge here, there is a very distinct hairline. And what this is that the skull is formed in different plates. And when an animal is born, those plates are not fused together, they're quite far apart. And as the animal matures, they fuse together and all those little plates slot in, so you get a really tight connective fit. That's why it is so hard to find specimens who are very young, like kitten skulls and newborn puppies, kittens, foxes, whatever it is, because their skulls are so tiny and so fragile, and their plates are separated, that they just get lost so easily, and when people do find them, they can't put them together in that puzzle piece, so they think it's a hopeless cause. So I'm going to show you some close-ups of skulls so that you can see their lines and how to put them back together. And as I said, there is no such thing as a broken skull if the mandible is separated into two parts and it's off the skull. That's very normal. The only time it's actually broken is if you do have large cracks and fractures in the bones themselves that is not related to the fault line of the plates. Here's a close-up view of some skulls, so you can see more of the lines. This one here, his cranium is completely perfect. He does have some missing teeth, which I do have. Teeth do fall out, so if you see skulls with missing teeth, that is absolutely normal. If you're there and your tooth pulls out, which these ones are still pretty sturdy in there. So if you have a skull and the teeth come out, that's no big deal. You can just put some glue down in these sockets and glue that back in there. That's not a problem whatsoever. What I want to show you here is the different plates. and things that can separate and pull out. These two nasal bones here, they connect up in here and they have little slot grooves. And these ones are not going to pull out for me because he still has some connective tissue in there, which has mummified in because he was mummified. These will pull out and down by pulling them straight out through, and you can push them back in. It's no problem. Sometimes these bones can warp through heat and moisture, different conditions. That's relatively easy to solve as well. You just have to soak them in some warm water, push them in place, and hold them down until they dry into position. You can see there's also a ridge along here. This part here, this whole side of the face can come off on either side because it has these lines that come straight down through and then it breaks off along here. And again, there is a line right here that also separates. Now, to show you an example of all of these plate separations, I have my little fox. She is separated on most plates. She also has some warping. You can see here her nasal bones are coming off. And once in there, you can see all the nasal cavity cartilage. So these just slide up. It can be kind of tricky to get them back up once they're out, but it's not too bad to get that up in place again. Just takes a bit of practice. But they do slide back in place. You can see that this head is separating here along these lines, and you can see that this part from the back that goes around is missing as well. She's also splitting in this plate down through. So if I pulled really hard on this skull, it would separate both outwards and downwards, and you'd just be left with a whole bunch of little pieces down along the palate. Now, she will fit together like a pretty good puzzle piece. Like that there, that's along her plate line. And again, although she is in several parts, I wouldn't consider this to be a broken skull because this is along the natural fault lines. She has a piece missing here. Which comes in here. That goes down into place around there somewhere. And this is really tricky to get back in place. This is actually a separated plate. It comes down this way. It's kind of tricky to get that in, but it snaps in here relatively snug. Skulls are pretty hard to get back together sometimes when they are separated like this, but it's like doing a puzzle. I can get this back in. I have had it back in. I shouldn't take it out for the demonstration. I should have just said this little part comes out too. But we will get this back in. It's just a demonstration that all of these parts do come apart. Now, when you can say a skull is broken is with an example like Ember here. Her skull was in several pieces. She was roadkill. Now, some of these, like these two parts here, that's two separate plates apart. But if you can, if the camera will focus here, this part here and this part here were actually broken out. Where she had been hit by the car, she was shattered. So she's requiring a lot of gluing and a lot of time to put her back together. She was broken around a lot of the plates, but there's also other parts of the skull that were completely broken out, and I had to glue back together like a puzzle. As I said, this is taking quite a long time to get her to how she is. Now this skull, I will say broken. Ember is a broken skull. Other skulls are not broken, they're separated. And if they're not separated, they're just in their normal pieces. It's natural for the skull to split into 3 parts upon decomposition, and then the teeth to follow as well. If there's no organic tissues to hold them in place, they're not going to stay in their sockets.